Hi everyone. Thank you for waiting. Sorry for the slight delay there, but I'd like to wish you a very warm welcome. My name is David Hopwood, and I'm the publisher of Renewable Energy Focus Journal. And I'm delighted to introduce this webinar in association with Schneider Electric, which is going to focus on microgrids, but specifically looking at how microgrids can enable greater uptake of renewable energy. So thanks to everyone for attending today. I know you're all very busy on projects and things like that, so we do appreciate your interest and your time. And thanks, of course, to the team at Schneider Electric as well, and our speaker today, Francois Bourges, without whom this webinar, of course, wouldn't be happening. So welcome, Francois, and many thanks. There are a lot of people registered for this webinar today. And I think this really reflects an increased awareness in microgrids globally, both the grid-connected but also off-grid projects as well. In fact, I recall last year we actually ran a webinar about hybrid microgrids with a focus on Southeast Asia. And I recall that one was really, really well attended too. So what do we think is behind this interest? Well, as we know, there's a fundamental transition underway in our energy infrastructure. And that's tending to underpin the development of things like microgrids. And at the same time, I think most people would now agree that we've also implemented renewable energy to a scale where its integration has had and continues to have a really quite significant impact on our conventional energy infrastructure. So I think these two related factors have created something of a challenge for the energy sector. Namely, how does this infrastructure ideally need to evolve as the grid becomes more decarbonised, more decentralised, and also as greater digitisation gives us even more control of these assets. Under this new paradigm, we need to find pathways that enable renewable energy technologies to coexist with conventional sources of energy. And what's really, really interesting about the webinar today, as we'll hear, is that I believe microgrids can play a crucial role in addressing some of these challenges. So we do really hope you'll find this interesting. And the aim at the end is that you'll be able to take back some of this knowledge and some of these ideas back to any projects that you may be developing on the ground. And I'm sure Schneider, as an organisation, will be glad to advise further if needed. Okay, as for today then, something of a change to previous webinars in that we just have the one presenter today, but that does mean that following the presentations in about half an hour from now, we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A. And for the audience, you can pose questions at any time using the webinar platform. So please do pose them as you think of them, and hopefully with this extended Q&A at the end, we'll be able to cover quite a few of them. Also, another thing to mention, at various points during the presentation, we'll have a poll question as well. We'd like to encourage you guys as the audience to get involved a little bit. So you'll see some questions on your screen. They're multiple choice. If you could just select the option at the appropriate time, we'd appreciate it. Produce some interesting insight for us to think about. More of that later. So that's what we plan to cover today. I'm not going to speak any longer, so I'm going to introduce our special guest speaker today from Schneider Electric to talk about how microgrids can help address some of the challenges I alluded to earlier, and also hopefully give us some insights into how microgrids can contribute to increased penetration of renewable energy. So, welcome Francois Bourges, who is Schneider Electric's Global Marketing Director for Microgrids and Energy Flexibility Management offerings. Francois is a recognised expert in the building controls market and in grid mechanisms for energy users. And during his professional career, he's managed numerous projects, acquisitions and market strategies in these domains. He's also led the definition and launch of the company's EcoStruxure microgrid offers, including a cloud-based platform, EcoStruxure Microgrid Advisor, and the EcoStruxure Microgrid Operation for Commercial, Industrial and Community Markets. So I'm sure you'll agree, hugely well qualified in this area. So I'm going to turn things over to him now. Francois, a big welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, David, for this introduction, this very clear introduction. And as you say, microgrid is a really hot topic today. What I wanted to highlight is the way microgrid is contributing to the usage of renewable energy, and of course to help for a sustainable environment. So what I will address during this seminar, roughly four main topics. First of all, energy trends and market characteristics for microgrid. I think it's important to highlight what is a microgrid and what it is not, of course. How it contributes to a positive energy transition, so to a green energy transition. I will display what type of solution we can use, what is available now for developing microgrids all over the world, and some project references which are already installed or in progress, but most of them are already running. So it's to highlight that microgrid is really a market and not a dream today. So in terms of energy trends and markets characteristics, so Schneider likes to communicate on this type of trends. The 3Ds, more digitized, more decarbonized, more decentralized, and of course the E, which is more electric. So Mr. Pouyanné from Total, which is was not an actor of the pure electricity, said the 21st century will be electric. So I think we can believe him when he says that, because he has a lot of other domains than electricity. So electric will be 2 times bigger. Digitalization and decentralization are leading us to a new energy paradigm, which is, of course, linked with the microgrid approach. And last but not least, the idea is to link this digitalized and decentralized energy approach with decarbonized, because that's clearly the trends we want to achieve. So what is a microgrid? I put a US definition: a local interconnected energy system within physical boundaries. So of course, in a microgrid, you have to generate your local energy through different means. CHP could be one of it, gensets, diesel generator, of course, and in addition to that, more and more now are the distributed renewable generation, like solar, PV, biomass, and so on. So in our definition, we say we can address a microgrid above 100 kilowatts. Okay, it's not really a fixed barrier. Below that, we can speak about nanogrid. There are not big differences between both at the frontier, but let's say that nanogrid is a fully integrated solution for a single owner, while microgrid can be much more diverse, and that's what we will see in the coming slides in the presentation. So to be a little bit more technical, a more detailed definition says that a microgrid, of course, consists of distributed energy resources. So in our definition, distributed energy resources encompass distributed generation and also loads. And of course, in the middle, you can find the battery, which can be both. The difference can be seen when we are speaking about the grid connectivity. So a microgrid can be either connected to the grid or can be disconnected from the grid. And both solutions can be provisory or always connected or always islanded. So we have several capacity of microgrid, and we will address all of them in the market I will describe. So we have seen this So I am in the marketing part, so I like matrix with two axes. The first one, we just see it. It's a grid-tied or off-grid solution. Another one, which is quite interesting in microgrid, is either we have single owners or we have multiple users. And so we have roughly defined four quadrants. First of all is what we call the prosumer, the grid-tied single owner, which wants to optimize their energy bill and to supply their loads with a reliable energy, up to a smart district or eco district, what we call. There are several names, which encompass several different actors who have their own interest, but who can be supplied with a centralized additional source of energy in different manners. On the other side, we have the grid-off-grid solution, either multiple users. The most highlight example is an island who have no access to the main grid, who want to supply the local inhabitants with a reliable energy. And this is something which can enter in the microgrid definition, as well as a remote mine or industry in the middle of the countryside who have difficult access to energy, and who want to supply their activity in an optimized way. I will come back on those different categories. So maybe it's time to have a first poll question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Francois. Yes. So if you recall at the start, I mentioned some polls that we'd like to run, and just thinking about what Francois was describing, these different types of categories of microgrids. It would be really interesting to get your take as an audience and as a community as to which category of microgrid is most relevant to you. You know, maybe in the projects you're developing or studying or whatever. So on your screen now, you should be able to see a question with some answers. So the question would be, which category of microgrid is most relevant to you? And the four possible choices are A, pure grid-connected microgrid, B, grid-connected and islandable microgrid, C, pure islanded microgrid, or D, several categories. So if you're interested in more than one category, shall we say? So if you could give your response now, we'll leave it about 20 or 30 seconds or something like that. Actually, I believe that poll might already be published. So, Francois, what do you make of the responses there? Can you see the answer to those
no,
to that question?
Unfortunately, I can't see the answer.
Okay.
Yeah, I should.
You just.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Are you there? Do you have them? Good stuff. Which bit too quick for you.
Okay. now I get it. So 43% are grid connected. So that's I think people are mostly in a energy manager or people interested to deliver projects, and that's in line with the market we see. Grid connected and islandable microgrid is the most requested solution, and we can add some percentage of several categories, which is 23%. So clearly, one of the pure most important value behind microgrid is the capacity to island, even if we are grid connected most of the time. I would say 90, 95, or 99% of the time. So this is an interesting confirmation of where the market of microgrid is today. And of course, we don't forget pure islanded, but it's a limited percentage in line with the market. Okay, so just to introduce the value behind microgrid, because as we can see, microgrid is destined to an energy manager who has some expectation around his site activity, and not only about energy, but what he expects from energy is mostly can be summarized in three different values. First of all, he needs reliable energy, and that's what we see on the poll questions. He wants to supply his loads 100% of the time, and without any interruption most of the time. He wants to have an efficient and optimized way of purchasing energy. He has to optimize his energy bill and minimize his costs of maintenance and so on of his energy assets. And last, because it's important for this webinar and it's more and more important now, he wants to reach a much more greener energy. First of all, by better integrating renewable sources. Of course, autoconsumption is one of the major way to do that. And it can contribute to the grid balancing by leveraging its flexibility, could be in a demand response manner for helping the utility avoiding starting polluting power plants during peak periods. That's another way of contributing to green energy environment. So if we just come back to what are the different requests for microgrid in the geography, I'm not sure all the answers comes from US, but in the US, clearly, of course, there are differences from one state to another, but there are in some states some weak grid, in some other less, but in some they are weak, and more and more we have severe weather events. So the expectation for microgrid in the US is mostly driven by securing the supply and by being able to disconnect from the grid either voluntarily or involuntarily, depending on the condition. In Europe, we have much more a strong grid. So what is the issue is to integrate more and more distributed energy resources. And for that, we need to have a mean to use the energy produced by this renewable DR mostly all the time, and most of the time when we are connected to the grid. And what is new now in Europe appearing is an approach with eco-districts to have a local production and even consumption of energy which can be used locally and in order to optimize the energy supply. In other regions, what are the market drivers today with microgrid is of course we are with a weak grid, and sometimes we have difficulty to access to the grid because it's far away and it will be very costly. So we have either fully islanded microgrid, of course in islands, but also on the mainland when we have difficulty to access to the main grid. So this is of course a caricatural picture, but those are the trends we see, and of course in the full countries we can see all types of microgrid I described earlier. So to summarize the introduction, if I can ask that an introduction, 3 types of microgrid: 100% connected, so impossible to disconnect from the grid; connected but islandable, which is most of the requests as we see in the poll question; and fully islanded or remote connection, not connected to the main grid and fully independent from the grid. And the major customer value, if we sort them by geographies. In North America, roughly, the idea is to have the capacity to operate off-grid, but most of the time grid connected. In Europe, we have the emergence of a community and the introduction of renewable energy, most of the time in a grid-connected manner. And in Southeast Asia and Africa, islands, access to energy are an important value. Okay, so now I think the picture of microgrid becomes clearer. So how do microgrids contribute positively to the energy transition? And of course, energy transition is going to much more green energy. So I like to put some figures. I think it's interesting to have it. There are several figures coming from a survey given by CODA, a French consultant company. Sorry, in French, but c'est les potentialités des marchés des installations hybrides, diesel and PV. Just we can learn that we have 168 gigawatts of install base. It's not all those 168 gigawatts in the microgrid definition because we have 51% in a pure backup. That means it's just emergency power, which is used only in case of emergency, and we don't call that a microgrid. But for roughly half of the remotely supplied sites, there is a capacity to replace the diesel generator by renewable sources. So the market is roughly big. We can see 85 gigawatts is when we know that the peak consumption in France has been reached is 100 gigawatts. So 85 is when we are in a peak period, in peak time. It's a huge market which can be addressed to mix diesel with renewable and not to have pure diesel solution like it's mostly the case today. I don't insist on the advantage to mix diesel with renewable or even to switch to pure renewable, which is a little bit more difficult, but which is the aim at the end in a long time from now, but it will be a possibility. We have a high capex, but with a low OPEX, and of course, we improve the carbon footprint when we mix with renewable. I think it's important to highlight that. So the value proposition for sustainable microgrid. So 100% connected microgrid, what can we do is of course to increase the use of green energy, so optimize the self-consumption of locally produced renewable and try to reach 100% auto-consumption ratio. That means consuming all the PV we are producing. And another goal is to optimize what we call the auto-production. That means the parts of local energy in the mix of the sites. Difficult to reach 100%, but to increase it. 100% connected microgrid can also participate to DR mechanism. It enables to participate to grid balancing operation together with a commercial aggregator or directly with the grid balancing operator. It's only for large sites, and the goal is to integrate more renewable in the grid itself, being helped by prosumer who can leverage their flexibility to optimize the coincidence between production and consumption. In the fully remote microgrid, so we see it, the idea is to minimize the fuel usage, and there are now some capacity to get our money back. We have identified a return on investment in 5 years by decreasing the OPEX, and of course enabling to supply the remote sites with avoiding the risk to supply remote sites with fuel in some dangerous area, which is not always obvious. So big interest to switch from pure diesel to more and more renewable. Possibility to progressively invest in green energy sources little by little, not to switch from pure diesel to full green energy, and to supply multi-site energy with a robust and reliable energy resources management. So all that will lead us to a greener energy supply by implementing microgrid or allowing microgrid to evolve in a much greener direction. So for that, if we switch on how do we control the microgrid, so we have splitted the microgrid control roughly in 4 layers. First layer, starting from the bottom, is connected product. So we need to have a local product which can enable different sources to operate or not, enable loads to be shaded or not, according to orders provided by the 2 upper layers. And the 2 upper layers, first one is what we call the edge control. The solution coming from Schneider is called EcoStruxure Microgrid Operation, and it manages the microgrid when it is off-grid and during transition periods. So it will be the leader for identifying how much energy we need and how many loads can be supplied during off-grid operation. And it also manages the transition from grid connected to off-grid, and of course vice versa. The third layer, which is very important, is the layer which enables to manage the microgrid when it is connected to the grid. So it optimizes the way we consume energy on site and optimize the energy bill according to the energy contract. We will just come back on that to give more details because it's an important topic. So for controlling a microgrid, of course, I didn't indicate all the microgrid components like distributed generation, loads, and so on, which can be numerous. But for controlling a microgrid, it's interesting to split the control part in 3 different layers. So I can drink a little bit water.
Yes, you have some water. Yes, thanks, Francois. You have a quick drink. Thanks, everyone. You should see the second poll question on the screen now, the second of 3. So hopefully you're not finding them too disruptive. But this is really interesting to get this kind of feedback from the audience as well. So for poll question 2. What is the most important value offered by microgrid for you or your customer? And that would be A, reliability, B, sustainability, C, savings, D, greater grid independence, or E, if there's other answers. So if you could fill that in, and then we'll just give it 10-15 10-15 seconds, and then hopefully we'll be able to see the answers there.
Okay.
Good.
I think I have a lot of very interesting results. It's really balanced, and what is very interesting is that other is very low, so everybody has an idea of what they expect from a microgrid. And we see a real balance between the different propositions. So that shows us that microgrids are very different from one need to another, and there are places for different categories of microgrids with different values. Interesting results. Thank you, David, for launching that. So now, as I introduce the microgrid and define the landscape of microgrid, I will detail the solution by microgrid categories. So let's start with the connected microgrid, which was the most popular one in the first poll question. So here is a roof architecture approach, so splitting the two layers I indicated earlier in two parts. First of all, a cloud-based solution called EcoStruxure Microgrid Advisor. Why is it cloud-based? Because it embeds lots of advanced algorithms to make prediction about what will be consumed, what will be produced, and to take decision to optimize the way the microgrid will behave, to minimize the energy bill, and optimize the way we will auto-consume the local produced energy, if there is some, of course, but if there is no, we can't speak about a microgrid. So if there are some renewable energy sources locally, EcoStruxure Microgrid Advisor will enable to try to reach 100% of auto consumption and decrease the carbon footprint of the site. In this case, EcoStruxure Microgrid operation will only enable the different DR to become flexible or to become predictable. So by exchanging information between the site and the platform. So the way it works, EcoStruxure Microgrid operation make prediction, take into account the different optimization possibility like tariff or demand response or auto consumption, and optimize the way the different consumers are using the energy in the most favorable way. So this is the first category of connected microgrid. Self-consumption, so I display one example of optimization, which is self-consumption. So we make the prediction of what will be the local production, and according to the different loads, we estimate that the flexibility can help us to maximize the consumption of the locally produced energy. So this is calculated by the platform in order to make it happen. So the other use cases, so here is a summary of how it works. So we collect the information, metering, weather forecast, and so on, making a prediction and optimization, and controlling the different loads according to the different use cases. Use cases are tariff management, so enabling the usage of energy when the tariff is low compared to when the tariff is high. Reduce the demand charge reduction, or avoiding overpassing the demand charge to avoid paying penalties when it occurs. So identifying when the demand charge could be overpassed and setting up all possible actions to avoid overpassing the demand charge. Self-consumption, I don't come back on that. And demand response connected to third-party commercial aggregators or utility. You can provide site flexibility, being paid for that, of course, and contributing to decrease the energy demand during peak time or during some specific events, central maintenance, and so on. So this is the way connected to the grid can optimize the way consume energy and contribute to consume much greener energy, and even help the utility to have a better energy mix in terms of sustainability. The eco-district solution. So what are the trends now, as we see in Europe, but of course in other geographies, is to produce local energy and distribute locally the energy to the inhabitants. So we need, of course, also to predict what will happen and to identify the way the locally produced energy has to be distributed to the local inhabitants, and of course how it can be consumed locally. For example, if we have a district, we could have a large CHP and some public lighting. So maybe the CHP production will be used for public lighting. It's much more difficult for PV because it's not really at the same time, but with a battery it could be possible. But the idea is either to consume it locally or to use it to distribute it to the local inhabitants, which is another capacity. So the value proposition is to optimize all the energy usage at the district level, and the associated advantage is to enable the distribution company to have less electricity exchanges on the distribution line. It's you consume what you are producing locally, and there is less congestion on the distribution line, even if it's at the end of the line. Offer for remote customer. So at this stage, what is very important is to supply the loads and to balance locally the microgrid. It's very easy if you only have a genset, which is really easily dispatchable. It's much more complicated as soon as you add a renewable energy. So we need to set up advanced algorithm for balancing the microgrid in any case, even if we have more and more renewable and, of course, intermittent source of energy. And that's the main challenge, to balance the microgrid 100% of the time. And for that, of course, there is a real-time balance, but in addition to prevision forecast to set up the resources in advance and to plan what are the necessary resources to supply the microgrid. And for that, we need a microgrid controller for setting up all those use cases. So sharing strategy means what type of distributed generation has to be used in real time for supplying the different loads and the different needs. Load sharing and load shedding. So shedding means using the capacity to shed some loads, non-critical, non-priority loads, for balancing the grids, and trying to reach more than 30% renewable, which is barrier we need to overpass for accessing to a much more sustainable microgrid. So this is a technical barrier we need to overpass if we want to put more renewable in the microgrid. Okay. So now let's switch to project references, which will highlight what I explained just before. So identifying several categories of microgrid all over the world. So as we said, There are connected microgrids much more in Europe. So here is an example in France where we have integrated a large battery storage system in addition to PV production in a headquarter of a utility in the west of France. And the aim was to have an office building which can work fully islandable from the grid, even if the grid is accurate, but they wanted to have this capacity to isolate from the main grid, installing both solutions, EcoStruxure Microgrid Advisor for making prediction and EcoStruxure Microgrid operation for local balancing of the microgrid in case of disconnection from the main grid. And this site is also re-injecting energy to the grid when there is extra PV production. Another example in Texas this time. So it's roughly the same as the previous one, except we are also managing the different loads through the building management system to leverage the contribution of the loads to the grid balancing and to optimize the energy bill, and of course to optimize the way we use the locally produced energy because there is a huge amount of PV locally which has to be used and to be managed because it sometimes overpass the needs of the microgrid. There are also some electrical vehicles and some energy storage, so it's a very complete microgrid, and the size is quite huge. It starts to be a big microgrid for a single owner. So Shedd Aquarium, a bigger one in the region of Chicago, in Illinois, or Illinois, I don't know how do we pronounce. And there is a big lithium-ion battery for participating to frequency regulation system, and in this manner reducing the energy bill. And they also have installed, maybe not, no PV on this stage. There are microgrid contributing to the frequency regulation with the local utility, and it is really something which helps to for the site owner to save money and for the utility to optimize the grid management. This is an example of smart districts in France, in the Alps, where there are 6 or 7 different buildings with different resources on it. Some have PV, some have batteries. There are some local EV charging, some centralized EV charging plugs, energy storage, CHP, and all that has to work in an optimized way for minimizing the request to the main grid, even if this campus is 100% connected to the grid. The aim is to maximize the use of local energy, which is quite huge on this site. And the RITS project is an island in close to Singapore. It's a common project with several partners like NG and the University of Singapore, where we are developing a fully islanded microgrid, 500 kilowatts on Semaku Island, close to Singapore. It's a development in progress, and the aim is to break the 30% renewable penetration limit with a scalable approach, and we implement dedicated generators for overpassing those 30% renewable, which is the aim of this project, and of course supplying the different inhabitants 100% of the time. And last example is Microsol, which is a capacity to supply remote areas in Africa for different purposes. So for most important is to reach to drinking water, irrigation, but of course electricity for day-to-day life is also important, and that's something which is spread in some African region. It's a much smaller microgrid which is implemented together with battery, some gensets, and different DER consuming loads, which are pumps and the charging plugs for different electrical devices. Okay, so from my side, I have finished the presentation. I think there is a last pull question, David.
Yes, absolutely. Many thanks, Francois. You get yourself another drink of water. I think you're going to need it because there's quite a few questions come in over the past half an hour or so. But just while you do that, if we could just ask you one more question, if that's okay. So the question you should see now is, what, in your opinion, is the most significant factor in microgrid market development? And the options would be creating a microgrid channel, securing financial backing, increase of energy cost, decrease of technology cost, ease of use, or any other options there. So if you could just fill that in, and then as soon as I find out from my colleague that those poll results are available, then we'll ask Francois to give us his brief take on those, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. So, how are we doing on the poll? Do you see the answer? Excellent.
I can see. Okay.
Good.
So the most important answer is decreasing of technology costs. So I think there are two answers behind. Is it requested or is it a reality? So that's the question I could have behind this poll question. But I fully agree that, for example, I presented batteries, lithium-ion storage. When I started in this microgrid business some years ago, it was really impossible to invest, except very early adopters could do that. Now it has decreased roughly by 3, a ratio of 3. So I know it's not enough, and battery is a very important part of microgrid. But what is, I think, important now is to have access to optimal control means for microgrid, and easy to use, and of course lower cost solution. And this is what is ongoing.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about batteries. I actually had a very quick question, so I'm just going to jump in and ask this. I was reading recently that Tesla have just built and turned on quite a large battery in Australia. It's about 129 megawatts per hour or something like that. And I'd just like to get your take on, with batteries now scaling up to that size, how could that change the landscape for integrating renewables and microgrids and things like that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think batteries is an important part of microgrid, even if I would say flexibility is obviously important for microgrid. As I mentioned, we have distributed production, and we need to make the link between the local production and the local consumption. And for that, we have to play on flexibility. Of course, battery is a mean for reaching flexibility, but there are other means. Prediction is one of it, and also we have a lot of storage-like mechanism For example, when you speak about HVAC, you can delay or anticipate some heating or cooling for some minutes or even some tenths of minutes. And this is so you use the building envelope as a storage means. You have also ice storage for injecting this cooling capacity to the building during nighttime or even when there is less electricity. So lithium-ion battery is important, and there are more and more progress, and the price are decreasing. But what is very important at the microgrid scale is the flexibility capacity increased by lithium-ion battery, but not only.
Okay, good. Thanks for that. Okay, we're going to move on to the questions now. Just a very quick thank.
Maybe I just wanted to conclude, David.
Yes, sorry. Sorry, I jumped in a bit there.
So just to conclude, I think it's everything has been said. We started from microgrid, I don't know, 150 years ago, with Thomas Edison building a microgrid in New York. We switched to fully centralized and mutualized production means. And what is now the trend is to have a combination of both. We will have the grid, of course, it will stay there, but we will have more and more microgrid because there are different needs as we see. So it's a complementary solution, and it will not replace the grid, of course, and it's a complementary solution which enables to incorporate renewable energy. When it is mandatory, sometimes we have to replace polluting sources by greener sources, and a big important item is community to organize themselves to locally produce, and of course they will locally produce clean energy, and all of these new trends will require some digitization to take decision and to make prediction. And I think that's all for me, and I leave you the end, David.
Excellent. That's good. Nice way to finish, and thanks very much, Francois. That's a really, really thorough presentation as well. I think you've done an excellent job there in actually quite a short space of time. We have got some questions coming in, so I'll move through those in a minute. I just wanted to say, because we've been asked about the slides, and I believe that we will be able to make the slides available at some point after the event. You will also be able to go in and watch the webinar again on demand if you want. It will be hosted on the Renewable Energy Focus website and possibly also on the Schneider Electric website as well. So you should have access to everything afterwards, including the poll data as well, if you'd like that. Okay, I'm just going to fire away with some questions now, Francois. I hope that's okay. Yes. So one we've got here that's come in from someone in the audience. Does the sizing of the energy source in a microgrid matter for it to operate in islanding mode?
Yes, sizing is a very important topic, and we see the poll 3. What is important is the decreasing of technology price. So I guess all the price are important, and we want to develop our customer to develop an optimized microgrid, and for that we need optimized sizing tools in line with the way we will manage the microgrid afterwards. So this is a very important topic to dimension in an optimized way today the different resources, to optimize to make it more efficient, even if later we can add some new resources. As we can see, we need scalable solution, and the external condition can evolve during the time. So we need to have an optimal solution at one day, and this could evolve during the lifetime of the microgrid.
Okay, interesting. I mean, thinking of renewable integration or renewable aspects of microgrids as well. A couple of questions related to that. How does one, when you're designing these projects, how does one optimize the renewable dimensioning in a project? And sort of related to that, how could you manage more than about 30% of renewables in a microgrid? I wonder if you could speak to that.
So for Yeah, I can speak. It will be long, but I try to summarize. So to overpass this 30% of renewable, which is a physical barrier, we need to access to a virtual generator inverters. It's a little bit technical, but I'm sure a lot of people in the audience knows what is behind. So we need to recreate the grid reference, even if we are off grid. And of course, we need to have these virtual generator inverters, but we need also to control it with our control solution. So there are two conditions for overpassing this 30% renewable, which is very important for accessing to a clean and sustainable microgrid, is to have the relevant inverters and the relevant control capacity, and our EcoStruxure microgrid operation is able to manage this virtual generator to overpass this 30% renewable in a microgrid.
Okay, interesting. Just related to the last poll question, actually, something a comment's come in from somebody in the US, suggesting that for the last poll question, another important factor could be public understanding of microgrids and how important they are, which I thought was actually quite a good point there. I don't know if you have anything that you could add to that.
Sorry, I don't keep your question, David. Sorry.
Another important factor is public understanding of microgrids and how important they are.
Okay.
Just really to get your take on that.
Yeah. That's a good point. It doesn't have to remain in the expert hands, because as we see, anybody can have a microgrid. Any commercial buildings where you have no specialist there have to understand the benefit of microgrid, and there is a huge effort of communication to do for making people aware that microgrid is an interesting solution, and in addition to that, an easy to use solution. People don't have to be afraid, even if they are not specialists, to implement a microgrid, to implement some PV panel, to have some microgrid control solution, because it has to be simple, and we have to say it and to demonstrate it. It's a very important topic.
Yeah, interesting. And I think those case studies that you had at the end as well, I think demonstrated that really, really well. I think there's quite a nice range of projects there too. A couple of questions here about off-grid microgrids. So these seem reasonably technical, but I'm going to try them anyway. How do you manage, or how does one manage short circuit and protection during off-grid mode? Is that some? Yeah.
That's a very good point, and because it's very important to ensure the protection of people and of goods. Even if we are disconnected, because we have the short circuit current are different when we are connected to the grid and when we are disconnected to the grid. So we need to have two different earthing plan or protection plan, and we need to switch from one to another in order to ensure the protection of goods and people. So we need to have adapted circuit breakers and protection relays, which enables to switch from one protection plan to another. And we need to give them the information to switch from one plan to another. So this is it's the same. We need to have the control part, the brain, and the legs or the arms, which are switching from one situation to another. And this is very important.
Okay, interesting. And I think this is probably related to that. But what do you see as sort of best practice and the best types of technology for local distribution grid for off-grid microgrids, and that's specifically to keep costs down, but while maintaining safety? You may have covered that a little bit in your previous answer, but if there's anything more you can add to that.
Okay, of course the dream is to switch from 100% renewable, which is not easy today mainly due to battery price. So up to now, we mostly have hybrid solutions, a combination of dispatchable loads like a diesel generator and intermittent and renewable loads. And the optimized microgrid is today a combination of both. And as I said during the first question answer, we need to have dimensioning tools to identify how much PV, storage, and diesel have to be installed to optimize at time T now the microgrid, and of course which can be recalculated later on. So today the microgrid is really a combination of dispatchable sources and renewable sources, in addition to flexibility mean, which can be a battery or even some other flexibility, but usually a battery.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Now, I can see we're just about at time. I just want to, if it's all right with everyone, I just want to ask one more question, which I saw in there and which looked quite interesting. So, what role do you think wind power could play in upcoming microgrids? So both grid connected and islanded as well.
Wind power, you mean?
Yes, yeah.
We see some. Most of our customers have installed a very small wind power turbine. It's really not contributing a lot to the energy mix, but it's to say we have one. So I think today, from small microgrid below 1 megawatt, wind power is today not the solution. But maybe I'm wrong. But I didn't see people asking for wind power in the microgrid I have addressed in the recent period from now.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well, I think that's just about all we've got time for. Unfortunately, we haven't managed to cover all the questions that we got sent in, but if it's all right, Francois, if we can get these questions over to you, I wonder if you'd be able to respond sort of in writing, and then maybe we can put together a little document or something like that we can circulate to people, which gives the answers to some of these other questions. Do you think that's something that you'd be able to do at some point?
Yeah, I'll try to find time because I'm impressed by the number of questions. I think it was.
Yeah. No, some really
tough. So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's clear to me that there's some real sort of project development going on in this area, which I think is really good. And I'd like to thank everyone, for those who stayed to the end. Many thanks for your attendance. Hope you found things interesting. Thanks, obviously, to Schneider Electric again for today. And especially thank you very much, Francois, for your contribution today. I think everyone will agree it was a really good webinar. As I say, please don't forget there will be a recording of this that will be available online shortly. And also I mentioned the webinar we ran last year as well on hybrid microgrids using the Southeast Asia as a case study. That's also online as well at the Renewable Energy Focus website. So if you're interested, go and check that one out as well. And that's about it. So thank you everyone for your time. Hope to speak to people again soon. Until then, goodbye. Let's end the webinar, please.
Thank you everybody for your attendance.
Thank you.